All right, we're getting towards the top deadly sins in our hierarchy. There's two remaining, envy and anger. And so at number two, right, in the most instrumental and important deadly sins in INFJ life, I'm going to place the sin of envy. Okay, so I did think about it. It wasn't immediately obvious to me that the sin should be envy and not anger, but I decided to put anger at the top. You'll know more about why tomorrow. In any case, we're going to be focusing on envy today. And again, maybe this will surprise some people, maybe this won't surprise other people, but I hope to show you that envy is often a quite operative and influential factor in INFJ life. And of course, the more we can free ourselves of envy, maybe begin to feel more gratitude, for example, is part of a better life, part of a path of spiritualization. Of course, these processes are difficult to change because they originate in early childhood, and they often become quite, determining of the particular person. So the first thing that we might want to say is that the best way to determine whether someone tends to be envious, has that quality, is if they absolutely deny it. I remember being on a forum. It was an INFJ forum, and there was a kind of deadly sin questionnaire that people took, and they had their different scores, and people kind of compared their results. I took part in it as well, and the sin that seemed to, at least one of the sins that seemed to have the lowest score among the INFJs who were participants, maybe 7, 8, 10 INFJs took part in that particular forum thread. I can't remember exactly, but envy was very low, and it immediately struck me as odd, because how could you so confidently self-score yourself as not being envious? Like, oh, look at me, I am pretty free of envy. It's something that just struck me as odd, first of all, because envy is a human emotion, and nobody is entirely free of it. And also because I already had a suspicion at the time, this would have been 5-6 years ago, that INFJs had to deal with envy, perhaps more than your average person of another type. Certainly other types have to deal with it, but there's a uniquely INFJ way of dealing with envy and having envy in their life. But it seems easier for some reason for a lot of people to admit to, for example, anger, to admit to lust, perhaps. That could be tricky depending on your society, but anger, certainly, gluttony, certainly, sloth, of course, a bunch of other ones, seems easier to admit than to admit to the sin of envy. It's almost like there's something particularly petty and ugly in envy, which is not entirely deserved, because again, it's a universal human emotion, and that it's okay to feel it from time to time. If you remember, because sometimes people confuse envy and jealousy, the best way to differentiate between envy and jealousy is that jealousy is a 3-body problem, envy is a 2-body problem, right? So you're jealous of another person's, if they get attentions from a third person whose attentions you're looking for. So there's 3 people involved, whereas in envy, you envy the particular qualities, properties, achievement, status of just one other person. There's no third person involved. Okay, so that's the difference between envy and jealousy. And psychoanalysis has long established that envy is older, more fundamental, and more primordial than jealousy is. Actually, I should even mention that in Klein and other psychoanalysts, envy is really considered one of the root sources of mental unwellness, should we call it, if it's too present in the child and later on. And what counteracts it is gratitude. Now, the reason why INFJs will have sooner or later to deal with envy is that, or maybe an excess of envy, is that so many INFJs go through quite pronounced forms of compliance and even solipsism, you know, because solipsism, if you like, it's a bit like, you know, mania is a denial of depression. Mania is a, you know, someone who's manic is someone who's in denial of being depressed. That's kind of the basic psychoanalytic interpretation of manic states. Well, solipsism, you know, when you think about it, it's kind of a denial of being compliant, right? And I could explore that in more detail if you're curious. And so really ultimately the states are the same, except that in one case they're denied and in another case they're not denied. But because the compliant does not deny they're compliant doesn't mean that they are happy deep down, right? And they're going to come across people who strike them as being freer, strike them as being way more spontaneous. They're going to come across people who are not particularly neurotic, people who are able to get what they want, to express their desires and gratify their desires and not feel guilt. You know, say ESTPs, you know, if we consider that ESTPs in their non-neurotic form, you know, embody all those traits. And you are going to have INFJs who feel envious of those traits that they themselves feel they don't have, either constitutionally they don't have, or they don't allow themselves to have them because they feel so much shame, they feel so much guilt. It's been inherited since childhood. And in this sense, they're going to be envious. And sometimes, and this is really something that few people would admit, even though it is a component of envy, there can be schadenfreude. Schadenfreude when some misfortune befalls the person who's envied. And INFJs are inclined to feeling schadenfreude. It's true. And not many people will admit it because it's seen as an ugly trait, but it is true. And since I must lead by example, I will come forward and tell you that I have felt this before. Hopefully less these days, but I have felt this. Resentment of another person's qualities that we wish they had, coupled with its inevitable twin, schadenfreude, whenever that person experiences misfortune, because we envy, you know. And envy in this sense is a feeling that is inevitably going to arise in people who lack spontaneity, who lack existential authenticity, who know that they're playing a little bit of a role or very much of a role. And they're going to feel this inevitably when they're in the presence of people who remind them that there are other possibilities they're not daring to opt for. In this sense also, the feeling of envy is an alarm bell. It's a reminder that another way is possible. Okay? So hopefully you'll understand where I'm coming from. Let me know in the comments. Give me a like if you enjoyed this video, guys. Don't forget you can support me on Patreon. I could not do this without you, all this work without you, and I do need you more than ever. So please consider supporting me on Patreon. The link is in the description box to my Patreon page. You know that you get access to cool perks like the Discord server. There's now 50 of us. Come interact with us, exchange with us, talk to me and the other cool people there. As well as you get access as a perk to a bonus video every 2-3 weeks just for Patreon supporters, where I go in depth about a particular topic of your choice. Don't forget about The Infinite Soul, my latest book on the INFJ. First link below, get it if you haven't yet, as well as my previous book on the INFJ mind, The Ecstatic Soul, first book in the Soul series. Put my name on the map. Get it if you haven't yet. Link is below. See you tomorrow, guys, for the Sin of Anger.